It's a great day. Welcome to That's Great IT, your one-stop place to learn about IT ops by turning IT noise into insights and manual tasks into automated actions, powered by BigPanda. I'm your host, Craig Ferrara. Join me as I talk to tech experts and people from different walks of life, sharing great insights, the latest trends, and relevant topics about IT ops and AI ops. This is That's Great IT, powered by BigPanda. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode. Our topic today is one that's near and dear to my heart, growing IT ops across multiple areas of the business. And we're joined today by Mark Swartz, who is the CTO at Qtis AI. And Mark, I'd love to hear a little bit about the AI stuff and a little bit about you just before we dive into growing IT operations. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks. So I have a deep history in tech, so I'll just cover it really quickly. Started out in IT, PC, LAN, WAN operations with Microsoft at a very young age, moved to Europe, received the ability to take over the directorship of PC, LAN, WAN operations for Lear Corporation. It's a tier 2 automotive supplier. From there, started a company in Sweden, grew that company, sold that company, which was all managed outsourcing. So basically like IBM outsourcing below 30,000 seats or 30,000 devices, let's say. We bought data centers. So we ran data center ops. We had PC, LAN, WAN, large global, all the way to China, Taiwan, everywhere. And during that time, the data center operations were not as lucrative as they are currently. So a lot of telecos got into data centers. They started building out these glorious data centers in Europe, and they weren't profitable. So we started to purchase them. And when we purchased them, we also were, what are we going to do with this? Because there's a lot of compute. We had a lot of HP, Dell servers, and other systems. So basically, we started to partner with universities and do their compute for them. So early algorithm design, I don't want to call it AI back then, but it was algorithm design. Mm-hmm. So that was in 2005, and then just grew that. And I'll fast forward now. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Qtis AI, which is a platforms as a service AI company. We do something strangely called generative AI and synthetic AI imagery. We're the best in the world at it. And we do this for medical, beauty, skincare companies today, but basically any company who wants to get involved with genetics or anything generative or synthetics, they can use our platform. So,
oh, wow.
Yep.
Yeah. And by the way, love the evolution. Would you say, and not trying to take us away from our topic, but I tend to digress frequently.
Oh, same.
So thinking back in 2005, right, before we fast forward to the kind of the AI evolution of technology and the way that we handle data and build predictive algorithms, et cetera, what kind of the leading edge of cloud compute services or a cloud compute as a service for different institutions. And prior to that, most folks were probably managing their own data centers or some version of a data center with servers stuck in a basement to support their own internal processes, so to speak. So have a lot of background in not only this idea of, we'll say, software or services as a service, but thinking of it as outsourced cloud compute.
Yeah, so back then, on-prem versus cloud, right? Cloud existed, but it was difficult to convey the value back then that you did this hybrid solution without really saying too much. So you had an on-prem box that maybe did sync offsite. But anyways, it has evolved, of course, but it's roughly the same general function in its core state.
I think you'd be challenged to find a single business today outside of somebody spinning up the next greatest technology in a garage that isn't in some way outsourcing compute, storage, or hosting, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's prolific. It's everywhere. So let's talk a little bit then about supporting services and functionality and service time and availability in a cloud-based world where in many cases you've got in-house development operations and maybe support, but off-site hosting, off-site compute, off-site storage. And the reason I love this topic, again, today, growing IT operations across multiple areas of a business, to me, and open to interpretation. But to me, what I'm thinking about isn't necessarily growing IT operations. It's in many ways evolving your IT operations across multiple areas of a business. How do you handle change at scale? Whether you're bringing on a new team or a new discipline, acquiring software in order to help support process, or just rolling out new process in general. So let's kind of kick us off.
Yeah, sure. Let's sort of take a step back and let's sort of think about what is all this about. So basically, the companies, we'll call it Contoso Corporation from Microsoft, or Acme Soap Company. And let's start big. Let's talk about so I'm a CTO, so I'm external facing. I make sure all of the technologies that we build solve our mission for our customer. But then there's the CIO, my counterpart, which that person's job is to standardize and make everything stable internally and make sure it works for the internal people. So everybody we hire, right? So the HR costs, if we keep them highly productive and working, including our system, there's an HR cost to a system, everything's great. So we're doing a great job. The operations cost, or OpEx or CapEx within the company, is good, but let's bring it back. So what is our service level? So we always have something called a service level. And so the CIO's job is to make sure that we have an internal service level, which is a response timing for different priority trouble tickets, right? So priority one is like the top, like the business is down, we're not making money, manufacturing down, something's down. And then you have the other lower level ones, which are, I'm not sure how to use Word, or maybe there's a channel like a Twitter feed that we're getting some sort of data aggregate from, and we need to sort of parse that and get it out to the help desk to respond to something. So this is how I like to say it. On average, now correct my statistics, but this is from a couple of years ago. The average amount of applications in a typical company is 47 desktop applications. So that's, I think, 5 years ago. Business systems is 12. So we're talking ERP, HRM, finance, FICO modules. So 12 major business systems. And then the average is it's about 350 plus data sources now. So you're walking into this, right? If you're hired into this, you have to have a really good, calm demeanor and strategic plan, or extremely great speaking partners like Capgemini. I don't want to name drop, but if you have a lot of good speaking partners, they can really fast track some of this for you. But you're walking into what you could consider a jungle with a machete, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. And usually you do not have that roadmap. So you're just scrambling for a couple of years, and that's doing a great job. And you're hopefully calming the security concerns. So this is what you're talking about when you're taking on ops, right? So you're talking about system to system dialogue and data. You're talking human to human. And we won't talk about the human to human factor because that's just reporting and general discussions, but there's so much complexity. So where do you begin? So that's maybe why it was a very interesting topic for me, because I was curious to see what others are doing these days, because we struggled myself across different companies and enterprises to figure out a way to manage it ourselves. And we do a lot internally because we're software developers, right? So we're system engineers. So we always think we have the best idea, but is it the smart idea? So the choice comes down to, should we burn 100 hours on that or solve a complex modeling issue that we have for a client, as an example? So where do you divert your time? So that's like unfortunately, the big ugly picture about it. And then you have to somehow figure out a strategy at how to attack it.
You hit on two things here. The opportunity cost of choosing one project over another, right? What are you solving for? What's the benefit? What did I forego in order to take that work on? And then I love the way you break it down. You've got this kind of these relationships between different things. You've got system to system relationships to keep track of, system to human interaction, and then how are teams working together? And we see this every day when we're talking about how companies have set themselves up to support their own operations. You've got the system to system component, which is, to me, the technology integrations and how they're all set up and maintained and communicating with one another. You've even got a proliferation of technologies out there today that are just meant to look after those system to system communications. I mean, think of monitoring tools in general. They aren't a service. that supports the business or the customer. It's a service that supports service availability back to an operations group that facilitates system to human transaction.
Exactly.
But what we find is that the majority, I don't want to generalize too much, but a vast majority of the unsolved issue that we come up against in IT operations today is how teams collaborate, human to human. If I work in a DevOps model where my piece of the pie is these specific set of applications and underlying services, and my colleague over here is responsible, he's an SRE, he's responsible for the infrastructure that all of my stuff is managed by or runs on. He experiences an issue, I'm going to get all of that alerting. Right now, I'm not trying to get too far into the weeds, but just that what happens when there's nothing, I'm receiving all this information, everything is non-actionable, but I don't know it. So I'm spinning cycles over here trying to figure out what's going on. But my colleague over there is actually dealing with an outage and it's affected all my stuff.
Oh, yeah. It's upstream and downstream. Causality goes up and down. You're talking, this is going to be high, but shareholders, right? Board, C-level, direct managers, people doing the actual work. So it goes up and down, and somebody across that chain, we call it the supply chain of data or uptime, somebody has to manage that. And you were just what you mentioned. Here's an interesting thing for AI, what many people do not understand. So we are an AI company. We're extremely technical. We work on the edge of the capabilities today that are usable for medical use cases, let's say. To keep people working, that cost a lot. They're very expensive resources. We deal with AWS, GCP, we have Azure, we have on-prem because we have to. So just to keep their Jira or just to keep their task organization under control is a challenge in and of itself. And we didn't even get into like advanced working models where you have virtual workstations. So we could have an on-desk physical workstation, cost $70,000, which will stay up. We have an offsite in the cloud workstation for secure working utilization. And all of the work that's being done with GitLab, GitHub, all the source control, everything that's happening, there's so much going on these days that people fail to realize. It's literally taking like maybe the Empire State Building and tripling their plumbing and electrical and then saying manage that, right? So with multiple gears and nozzles, I mean, half of the data that we see or that new AI persons see, they have no idea what that data is. And they're extremely talented, right? They're PhDs, but what is all this data that I'm getting because this system's down? And then what happens is they just shut down because it's a creative process. So it's always for us, it's how to keep everybody working. And here's an interesting example. We have a couple simple pipelines that have a stack called ELK. That's Elasticsearch, Kibana, and Logstash. So basically it gathers logs from different systems. And that alone gathers logs from 13, call them primary systems. And somebody has to manage, I mean, it's just, where do we start? Where do you solve this problem? Because root cause analysis, I know that's core to your business offering. And that's sort of like takes me back to the days of talking with IBM. We would have at the end of the month, we would look through our trouble tickets from our clients and theirs. And we would look to see what the root cause were for the majority. We try to classify trouble tickets so we could solve the problem long-term. And that's what's happening today. The systems are not state enabled. So you don't actually know what state a system or a data point is in because they're not that advanced yet. So you have to have some sort of interpreter between all these systems and say, did I get data or not? We call it like a heartbeat. And if we don't get the heartbeat, it's like those military movies where you check in with everybody around the perimeter every 5 minutes. If you don't check in, somebody's coming out. That's literally what we still have to do. I mean, and we are advanced. So that's my interpretation from where I've been in the industry. So to your point, you cannot adopt new technologies if you're standardizing. So how does the CIO do their job and keep their tech forward moving? It's super complex and difficult.
Let's talk about that piece real quick then. So we know it's hard to roll things out really wide. Now, if you're a company that's getting big or pretty big, Or let's just say you're a very large company, but you're doing a lot of acquisitions, which we see a lot. Everybody's got their own process. Building a standard, let's put it this way. Building a standard in your tenured career, and then you retire halfway through the job of standardization and somebody else comes in and tries to standardize all over again. You end up with a mishmash of stuff. So we know it's hard to start and roll process or technology out big. In your opinion, then, is it advantageous to build process in silos so that you start small and then find ways for these individual organizations to work together with some efficiency? Is that an area that we can start? And we'll use a specific example. Maybe the example is you're trying to bring in a new, let's do ticketing system. Yep. Let's just take this basic example. You want to bring in a ticketing system so that an operator can receive an incident and remediate, right? And we know it's hard to roll things out wide to start with because people push back on change. The actual implementation of a ticketing system to communicate with all the various tools these different groups are using is difficult, takes a super long time. In your opinion, is it that you start just with one group and you work in silos and then you try to get groups to work together? Or how would you approach that problem?
I think it depends on how I'll get fired. Yeah. I hate to say it that way, but basically it's where will I fail? So if I'm doing this for an enterprise that's on an M&A strategy, let's say Cisco back in the day, so they acquired hundreds of companies. Yeah, so I think you have to figure out what do we have? That's the first question. Day one is what do we have? So do you have an asset management? Could you pull out like Wireshark and sniff the entire network to figure out what we have? Does anybody have that list? And they do not. So nobody really has that single list. So I call the CFO and I say, could you please give me the books for 12 months? And I'll look at all of the cost centers that are associated with IT. Ooh. And I try to hunt down from that aspect first. So the first point is, what are we paying for? Because that's usually what I have to solve anyways, right? So the moment I find out what we're paying for, then I have to find out if we actually have it, because maybe we have never deployed it. Maybe it was purchased. So licensing gets involved. So basically what's going on there. But to answer your question just about help desk, yeah. So I think you go around the business and you ask what will fail for you and what will cause you the most heartburn or grief. And you get the top 5 things from everybody. And then you try to normalize that into a list and figure out where those tickets are coming from. And then you have to figure out how to solve them fast. And do the operators on the first line of support, do they have any command and control, or are they just taking ticket information, or are they just sorting tickets? So I think typical 3-line support, that's the standard help desk process, right? So you have line 1, which are people who are just unfortunately being beaten all day by problems. They want to help, but they can't because there's no actionable execution scripts inside of a help desk system. So then they pass it to the 2nd-line person, which has maybe permissions to log into a couple systems and fix things, but they don't have access to all of them. So it's the 3rd-line persons who at the end of the week have maybe 3 major things to solve that somebody's been waiting for 6 days. And if it's around finance, like with anything to do with FICO, dangerous, right? Somebody's not getting paid. Payroll, it's so you just have to break it down and figure out who do we have to service first and start there and try to figure out how do you classify these tickets into priorities and give the people on first line support some tool to fix something. You can't just let them filter data. But yeah, it's difficult. So it's yet a difficult problem. But to answer your question, I think you have to start somewhere. So you just choose your battle and you try to implement whatever you can to start siloing some of that information, right?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And the idea of going through an inventory, figuring out what tools are currently available, deployed, and actually being utilized. Because we do find that there are tools that are purchased, deployed, but they were owned by some sort of tooling or someone who owns observability or process, thinking very specifically of IT operations.
June in Sweden. Support. Yeah, he manages all of that.
Right.
I'm just joking.
But you have groups that their job is to create the available toolkit utilized, but then the adoption of the tools, or people's knowledge or understanding that these tools are available to them and the benefits that they offer. There's no adoption. So going through that inventory, great first step, right? Now, if you're going to start thinking about, okay, service desk, again, using the service desk as the example, and you say, okay, we've identified that there's pain here. There's a need potentially to standardize a ticketing platform so that we can start understanding in a single source of truth the workload that's happening for IT operations at level 1, escalated to level 2, what's going to level 3. Everyone's using either the same tool with different instances that we can consolidate, or multiple tools. So we're starting small. We're just looking at one little piece of the pie here. Who are we talking to then? If we're thinking about just the service desk model, you're the CIO looking at internal process. Who do you talk to start those conversations then?
So I think in their case, it depends on the size of the company, but if you're a smaller firm, you're going to end up talking with NetSuite, Salesforce, people who deal with a data point called contact. And so you're dealing with some methodology of getting all the HR data so we can deal with inbound tickets, but that's the technical side. So the names of the roles, and I mean, basically you have to roll out something somewhere. So I think you start out with maybe departmentalize, right? So again, going back to priority, you find out what the priority is. So for manufacturing, it's going to be called MES system. So on the factory floor, anything that happens with MES has to be solved first because the factory stops working. That's millions of dollars for every manufacturer, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, everybody. So I think that's where you have to begin because that kills productivity. And then if you are, it just depends on the company type, right? So if it's finance, banking, the transactions have to flow. So security ops, that can't stop. So there's just, I think it's business centric, but I mean, maybe you were asking about a very specific area or.
No, the logic makes sense. Playing the devil's advocate though, if we're thinking about standardizing something like a ticketing system, I try to take just a tangible example for those who are listening. Do you take a ticketing system that maybe is not in use today and do you roll it out to a critical area of the business? Or do you test out the workflow with people in an area where, yeah, maybe we're handling P4s and P5s rather than the business critical applications or services internally that might expose us to SLA violations with our customers or payroll issues, for example.
Yeah.
Do you start small and test it, or do you just prioritize rollout based on how we're going to preserve or protect the business's revenue and essentially HR exposure?
Yeah, I think it's confidence level, right? So the more senior you are, the more times you've done deployments globally. I fortunately have had large global rollouts, like with Siebel CRM, and we're talking 50,000 desktops. So the adoption was crucial for that. So whatever was built had to be adopted by the end user, which were dealing with random various types of problems. So the answer that I would say is, are you a maverick and do you have a strategy to prove that what you're going to attempt is going to be adopted and useful in the short term, right? So practically stating, yeah, it's a trade-off. Do you go for the low-hanging fruit and just get something deployed to get a caveat, right? Hey, we did something great. Or do you go for the business problem and solve the hardest thing? So I think it comes down to the person. If they have the experience, they're going to be the maverick. And here's my European experience. When I showed up in Europe, probably within the first year, I was across all these different persons from different countries, and they always said the cowboys. And I never really caught on, and it was in different languages, but always the cowboys. And they would always say that the American style, they were too gruff. They didn't think everything through. But then in some cases, there was something called analysis paralysis, where we just analyze and BA, business analyst, everything out, right? And it's a year in, we have every little block and possible gating items solved on paper, but then we have to do something. So there's a trade-off. And it's in my experience that finding some place that you could actually make a benefit or a dent and help the business, you have to do it. Yeah. So you have to find something that's easily adoptable, that could have a small training process that gets people of a specific caliber onboarded and make it useful. So
I think from my experience, and by the way, the European cowboy reference, I've gotten that a few times where it's just like you just thought of this last week and you're trying to do something with it. You're trying to roll it out right now. What if it doesn't work? Well, yeah, fail small and often.
that's the Silicon Valley saying, right?
It's the American, it's the Silicon Valley technology attitude. In the experiences I've had with similar European teams that are building things, they roll things out very slowly, but near perfectly. I mean, every contingency has been thought through and it's rolled out very fleshed out. Even if you make changes, it moves a little bit at a different pace.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah, that's true.
So going back though to what you were saying about the kind of the rollout methodology, I find that the perspective that you're bringing here to this episode today is you are a C-level overseeing operations. You look holistically at the business. And I find that when we're working with someone who is high up in an organization that is able to think through process and business impact and looking top down at issues facing operations, that there is a much better chance for process and technology change to happen in critical areas of the business where big impact is going to happen. But when we're working with a team that is very tactical, maybe trying to solve a specific problem, maybe that problem is just something, in the context of BigPanda, right? Usually it's solving workload. We have all these a portfolio of system services infrastructure that need to be supported, and it equates to X hours per month to handle even a subset of what we should be handling. We want to bring in a technology to reduce the workload so we have the capacity to do more. I find when we're talking to someone, though, that's very operationally in the trenches, they are more about experiment before rollout. So instead of looking at this and going, if we applied this technology here, we'll have the biggest impact on the problem that we're trying to solve. It's start small, look at the initial results, and then try to expand outward. And as a technology provider, you then struggle to make the impact that you want to illustrate to the business. So we're always trying to figure out, who are we talking to in an organization, and do they have the perspective that's going to allow for a rollout that has the most impact, whether we're talking about a ticketing platform, observability tools, collaboration tools, doesn't really matter, right? And again, I'm thinking IT service side of the house. It really depends on whoever you're talking to, their perspective on the organization, I think.
Oh, absolutely. It's really about the personalities, right? So even if you're down in the trenches and your sleeves are rolled up, you're coding, you're on the factory. I always use the word factory floor, meaning that you're in the rooms that smell like sweat. You've seen the big rollouts. There's a war room and there's like the walls are covered with goals and processes, but but what is it that everybody's problems they're facing? They're usually some version of translation of data. What I mean by that is, regardless of what you're solving. So if somebody comes to me and says, I would like to solve this really tiny problem, that's great. What is it? What are the benefits? Could you walk me through the measurable goals? Could you walk me through the ROI on that and when we should see that? But tell me what data points we should start to see, like KPIs. I hate to use that term too, but where in our dashboards will we see this change affect us? Like, do we see any improvement? Can I push out 30 more vials of medication? Could I see 10 more patients? How does it trickle down, or how does it trickle up? So I think when anybody said every idea is a great idea and there is no wrong idea. I had a project manager who trained me, worked at NASA, and when you're brainstorming, everything's somebody's problem. So you have to sort of understand first. And once you understand it, do they clearly have a vision of how that could have causality somewhere else? So I think going practical on a specific issue is the best thing for persons listening, because sometimes this gets really abstract and we're talking acronyms and stuff. But if there's a specific case where somebody says, hey, I need a tool, right? And that tool is going to do this for me. It's every day. I get a request from some ML ops person that says we need to spend $65,000 for something. And I say, awesome. What is it going to do? And then they tell me, and I say, but couldn't we just parse a script and do that and dump it into MongoDB? And then once we have the data ourselves, we could actually classify it ourselves and then put some triggers on it. The point is that I don't want to say lazy, but people get laxity. I don't know the right term. I don't want to be negative, but do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I see what you're saying though, because I'm coming to you and asking you for permission to deploy a solution without necessarily talking about the problem or the benefit. And there's probably more than one solution out there to the problem you're trying to solve.
Yep.
And so the solution that you're proposing, there's probably other options that might be cheaper, easier to roll out. It makes complete sense to me. So let's do this. We'll try to wrap our thoughts for this episode. We're thinking about how do we grow and deploy something like an IT operation or some facet of IT operations globally across a business. And we've talked a little bit about you got to be kind of aware of three types of interactions. It's the system to system interactions that you're responsible for and that are just happening inside your business. You have to understand what's going on before you understand the operations, tooling, process. And part of that is also how those systems are interacting with humans. As you grow, how these different teams are working amongst each other, human to human interactions. And you talked a little bit about starting with this great inventory, right? Do we have an asset management list or inventory somewhere? What are we paying for versus what's actually deployed versus what's actually adopted? And then taking like this, what are the problems that we need to solve most urgently approach? So Mark, what I'd ask you to do as we close out our episode today is, what are some of your closing thoughts? If people are only going to remember the last 2 minutes of this episode, what is it that you would want to communicate to someone who's trying to approach IT operations in a big organization and, in general, make it better?
Make a list. No, inputs, outputs. Number one is, what are the inputs and outputs of your critical systems? And are those data? So are you sending data in somewhere via an API, and are you getting data out? Combing the market for somebody who can integrate with all of that as much as you can, right? You're not going to get one single solution. Maybe you're going to have three, but you could have 3 versus none, or you could have 10 versus none. So my point is that if you can find things that can consume the data, because once you get the data out of these disparate systems and these silos, then you can start to do something with it. And that will lead you to the ability to do anything like process mining, or find the anomalies, or you can find the characteristics of where things are going wrong, right? So you're looking for statistical anomalies, which are not outliers, like one single trouble ticket that could be the biggest problem because that person's extremely loud about their ticket. Or you could go find the system that's causing people grief in Brazil, in Japan, in Detroit, wherever you're at. It could be causing more grief. So I think just try to figure out what you have, where are the inputs and outputs, and who do they affect? Divisions, but mostly departments, right? What departments are they affecting? And classify that, and get on the phone or get on a plane and listen to the people, right? Because they're going to tell you flat out really fast what the pain points are. And if you can solve one pain point of 100 for each department, you're at least doing something. Even if it's a manual fix, you started. So start somewhere, and don't be too afraid, because there's enough vendors in the marketplace today that have advanced systems and solutions that will save you. Even if you're sort of like us, where we can fix everything ourselves and build it ourselves, think smart, spend some money, get your business flowing, and then maybe things will evolve and you'll realize that you're better off outsourcing or co-sourcing, having somebody help you. So don't be egoistic, maybe, if you're a technical person. And if you're the CIO, work closer with your CTO to tell them to standardize all of their platforms, because the CTOs are causing a lot of problems for the CIOs nowadays. So
those are sage words from a CTO in the market today and co-founder. Hey, I want to say thank you, Mark. Everyone, this was Mark Swartz, CTO at Qtis AI today. Mark, thank you so much for your thoughts. Really enjoyed talking with you, and really, really good kind of just structured advice from a very experienced IT practitioner. Appreciate you being on with us today.
I appreciate it, Craig. And by the way, I'm 20 years old, but I've worked in IT ops, so that's why I look so much older.
I can vouch for that. He's on camera and easily the most knowledgeable 19-year-old I've ever spoken with.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mark. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
That was great. Thanks everyone for tuning in. This has been That's Great IT, your one-stop place to learn about IT ops and AI ops, powered by BigPanda. Catch us on our next episode.